friends, how do we go? Do we have a little bit of a play around SSMS? Okay, get our fingers dirty? Hope so. What we're going to do now is we're going to start to develop our database, start to build our database. Now, we're actually going to build it multiple times because I want to introduce to you the concepts of the database, starting simple and then getting a bit more complicated. So, essentially, in this first kind of cycle, we're just going to build almost a copy paste of the flat files, but of the flat database, I mean, but in a relational sense. We're actually going to create tables for each of the objects, but we're not going to get into different forms of indexing and how we do the identity fields just yet. We'll do that in a second phase, if that makes sense. Okay, so a couple of big picture things first. You can either create most of the objects with like the mouse and right click and saying, create, add, things like that. Or you can learn to do it with typing and learning the SQL, learning the SQL. Now, SQL stands for Structured Query Language. Okay, it's one of those things that once you learn it, if you do it day in day out, you get better at it. It's faster to just type it than it is to use the mouse and all the different things that you can do here with an SMS and the shortcuts. So I'm going to ask that you type them out. Okay, learn them, and it's very simple. And as you get better at it, you'll get faster at it. It'll be a lot easier moving forward. Okay, so if we go back to our Excel spreadsheet, which I have right here, okay, how we started with this, and we started off by taking our addresses out of the main customer database and putting them in their own table. Okay, so we're going to kind of work with this again. We're going to create a very small database that kind of fits around this system, and this is what we're going to create here. Okay, so you can kind of see we've got our customers. Customers will then go to a contact. I'll explain that in a minute. Then we've got contact details and we've got addresses. Okay, and you can see here, make this a little bit bigger and move me out the way. Okay, you can see here we've got our lines which reference what we call keys, the primary keys and the foreign keys, and that's what links the tables together. So the way I always build databases. I'm very particular with my naming standards. You will have your own naming standards. Lots of different companies and they've kind of got their own, but they kind of all follow the same idea, and that is that you have a table name. Some people put a prefix of TBL against tables. I personally don't, because you might want to rename that to be something else like a view or something later on, and that doesn't make sense. So just giving the table a name such as customers or contacts to show it's a list of whatever it is. And then the very first field, in my opinion, should be the identity field. And in most cases, especially in this demo, we're just going to use an integer. I might touch on that in a later video as to different types of identity fields you can use, but now we'll just use integers. And then I have the secondary key, the foreign keys, normally early in the table. Obviously, as the tables grow and you add things, add features to the database, they come on the end of the tables. But especially in the beginning, when you're doing the main structure, try and keep all the keys located together. So I can see I've got a customer here. That customer has contacts. The customer also has addresses. So the address is linked to the customer. And within each customer, so for example, that other one we had here, if we go back to our Excel, we've got Mr. and Mrs. Jones. I'm going to link them as a customer. So the customer is Mr. and Mrs. Jones. And within that customer, you have two contacts. One's Fred and one's Kate. So there'll be Fred and Kate. And then each of those customers, or those contacts, will have their own phone number and their own email address. Now, you could have a table for email addresses. You could have another table for phone numbers. You could have so many different tables. Me, when I create one of these, because phone numbers and email addresses and, social media handles, you can have so many of them always being created. Rather than having like more tables added, I'll just have one table with a type ID that illustrates whether it's a phone, an email address, a social media handle, or so forth. So each contact will then have their contact details. Does that make sense? So this is what we're going to build. We've got a few different data types here I'm going to introduce you to. There's a lot more data types than just these. But again, as we kind of way through, we're going to drop and recreate this database a few times. And each time we recreate it, we'll be adding in more things to it. Okay. So in this demo, what we're going to do is we're just going to create these tables. And then we're going to come back in the next video and kind of redo it, adding more stuff to it. All right. Okay. So let's remove this. Come into here, come back to SSMS, and just to kind of break what I said before, to actually create the database, I will just do the right click because it is quicker, because it's a one-off, but you'll see what I mean later on, we do actually create the table. So we look here in our databases, we've got system databases and we've got user databases. The system databases here, we've got master model, MSDB, and TempDB. Don't worry about these for now. Essentially, these are just databases that come with the data, that come with SQL Server. You can modify them, you can look what's in there and so forth. But for this course, we're not going to worry about that. So don't click system, don't click database snapshots, go to databases up here, click right click and go new database. Okay. We're going to give this a name. I'm just going to call this demo 1. Okay. Owner for now will be default. Again, like I said in previous videos, I can have courses, and there are lots of other courses on there on different configurations and how you should best do your structure here with the log files and the data files. Whether you want simple recovery, full recovery models, and so forth. That's all outside the scope of this course. For now, just click OK. All right, and just to create the database, we might look at those if we have time later on, but for now, just click that, okay? So now we have our demo database, okay? There'll be no tables in it, obviously, because it's brand new. So that's what we're going to create next. We're going to come back, we're going to get our spec, okay, which is here. And now we're going to start, essentially at the top, we're going to start here with our customers. We'll create our customers, essentially our customer master table. All right. So like I said before, we can right click, go new table, and we can type out the fields here. We can give it a data type, okay, and just keep adding down. But I find that's just too slow, too cumbersome. Got been doing it long enough. I'll just type it out. So type here, new query at the top, okay, and then just start typing. So it's very simple. It's almost just like just thinking through how would you do it. So I'm going to type create table. Okay, I like to use uppercase. Again, without going too much into it, you can have case sensitive or case insensitive in the collation of the database. By default, it should be insensitive. So you can go create table and that will do the same thing. But I just find it's easy to look at visually to having all the reserved words, not just in blue, which is the default color, but in uppercase. All right. So we're going to call this create table customers. Okay, that gives us the name. Then open bracket, close bracket. Okay, that just makes it easy. They're kind of like the placeholders. Then we're going to come back and look at our spec. Okay, our spec says that we're going to have a customer ID, a customer name, and a create timestamp. And that just kind of might say, well, how long has this customer been with us, for example? All right. So our first field is going to be customer ID, and it's an int. Okay. So you can see there, we can go ahead and create a table with one field in it, and that'll be perfectly okay in terms of the syntax. But we want to still add a few more fields. So we're going to go here. You can on the same line. Again, I just prefer to have it all on a new line. I just find it's easier to read having it on a new line. I'm going to come here and go customer name. Now you can see it's gone red because I haven't defined a type. So in terms of different data types, like I said before, we're going to kind of cover them off as we go through. In the beginning, for a customer name, you'd want to go to something called a varchar or varchar, depending on who you listen to. It's varchar or varchar, and we'll give it a size of 1,000. So what this means is that you've got a string of a variable length that can go up to 1,000 characters. Okay, if you don't go up to 1,000, it won't use 1,000. A similar one, which we're going to touch on in a minute, is a char or a car. That will always use 1,000. So for something, anything more than a dozen, I would always go with a varchar, a varchar. Now, there's also an n varchar. What is the difference? Essentially, there's two differences. Whoops. Oh, you kidding. Oh, no, sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. Wrong button. Okay, so a varchar essentially just takes the basic Latin characters. An n varchar, is it Latin or basic ASCII characters, I think I meant to say? The n varchar will also take the extended ASCII characters. So ANSI, I believe it's called. Okay, so if you want to have, like in Portuguese, the cedilla and so forth, you need to have an n varchar. The main difference with that is it could therefore halves this number. So if you have just varchar, you can have 1,000 characters. If you make it an n varchar, you'll have, in this case, 1,000 divided by 2, so you have 500 characters. So if you're going to have foreign names, using in foreign countries, I would suggest using an n varchar for things such as customer names. All right. And then the last one, so create timestamp. I like using TS for timestamp. Create time, create date, whatever. From here, there's a few options. There's date time. That's the old one. It's still valid. It still works, but Microsoft recommends now use date time 2. It uses up less space, and you have more options. If you leave date time 2, I think it has so many points after the second, like milliseconds and whatever. If you go date time 2, 0, it's essentially what we need for a system like this. Okay, so date time 2 with a 0, and maybe if we get time, we might look at some of these other types of date times. But essentially, to create a table, that's all you need to do. Okay, so create table, type in the field names. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back because I'm lazy. I'm going to go back to our Excel. I'm going to get first name, surname, like this. So first name, surname, copy that. Now again, this is why I like to do it in SQL, so I can just type. I can copy paste and save typing. So I'm going to come here, create table contacts. Okay, so we're going to contact ID int. Okay, remember I was saying before, trying to have the keys at the top. So contacts relates to customers. So customer ID int, and then first name. Again, n varchar, and let's give that 100. Surname or last name. I see people use both. Joys of English, you can do different things. Back to our spec here. Next one we've got is gender, and you can see I've got gender as a char or a car. Okay, so before n varchar we'll use for a lot, but we'll only use up to what you're saying. But there is also like an ending, like a few bytes we take it up to say this is where, or this is the length of the field, okay, for each field. So if you're only going to know it, in this case, a gender can only be male or female, you know that it's going to be one character, so it makes more sense in this case to use a char. So gender and char of 1. So that will only use 1 byte, okay? And last thing we're going to do is a date of birth. I think it was SQL 2008 or maybe 2012. Up until then, there was only date time. Since then, they've actually now come out with just date. So it doesn't save a time portion. It's just the date. So again, it uses up less space. All right. So there's our contacts. The next one, again, create table. I'm going to go addresses. Okay. So like before, address ID is an int. Address also relates to a customer ID. And then we're going to street 1. can type street 2, state, postcode, and country. Okay, and again, because I'm lazy, I will just come here, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. Postcode is probably not going to be more than 5 or 6 characters, depending on what country. We'll leave it 10, and we're going to make that a fixed width. State again. Notice state's in blue because state's a reserved word. That will work, and you have to put quotes around it when querying it in some instances. I'm very particular, very odd in some things. I don't like having reserved words in fields, so I would probably use state abbrev just for the state abbreviation. So in the United States, every state has 2 letters. In Australia, every state can be abbreviated to 3 letters. And again, I'll make that like a char 10, just to maybe char 5 is enough for that one. And it gets rid of that reserved word. You can leave state. I prefer state abbreviation. That's just me. Last one then we're going to do, just to finish up this demo, is create table contact details to save the mobile phone numbers, the addresses, and so forth. Address and mobile email addresses. So contact detail ID. Contact ID because it relates to the contact. Okay, and then we're going to go type ID to say what kind of type this is, and then the last thing we're going to have is our contact detail itself. And obviously we don't know the width of the contact detail or what it is, so it'll be an var char, and we'll make that 1,000 again. There we go. Okay, so this is a script that will create our database objects for us, our tables. And then the simple thing is, we have to do is press F5 to run it. Now, really important, this is what we have to be very careful of. And I'm going to make this mistake to show you, and then we're going to undo it and then do it correctly. So if I was, for example, see in the top left, it says I'm in demo 1. Okay, you can imagine if you have lots of databases, or what happens to those who, you just log in, you don't think about it, it defaults to master. If you remember when I first logged on, there was no user databases, there's just system databases. The default is master. So if I come in here and I press F5 or I press execute, you'll see it ran successfully. It created those tables, but it didn't create them in demo 1 where I want them to create. It created them in master. So I come back into master now and I go tables. There are our 4 tables, just like we created them here. Yeah. So what we wanted to do, you can delete them one by one there, or because I'm going to use this script later on, I'm going to drop these tables. Okay. There's 4 of them here, 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 and here. And because I just want to run this, I'm just going to highlight that with an SSMS, press F5, and that will have dropped or deleted those tables. So in SQL, a delete is a drop in this case for an option, for an object. So I come back, I refresh, those are all gone. Now, because I don't always want to drop the tables, I'm going to just comment these out because we will be using these in later demos to add more stuff to these tables. Okay, so I'm going to just hide those. And what we're going to do is at the top here, at the top of our script, we're going to say use demo 1. Okay, so that just means when it starts the script, it changes the database to that database there. One other thing I'm going to introduce you to as well is a function called go, and go just kind of splits the batch up. So it's kind of, it'll use demo 1, execute that or pass that, and then it goes on to passing and executing the rest. Okay, so if you watch here, I'll run the script again. Up here we'll change to demo 1, and then the tables will be created in demo 1. Sorry, didn't mean the semicolon. Oh, there we go. Okay, so just on that quickly, you saw that when I accidentally had the semicolon there. In some instances in SQL Server, you will need a semicolon. We might talk about CTEs later on where you will be required to put a semicolon. It is kind of best practice, I think, to have a semicolon at the end of each statement, just kind of like in C#. It's not required except when you're dealing with things like CTE. So if you want to get in the habit of using semicolons, but yeah, just not after a go. Okay. So just to finish this off, if we come back in here into demo 1, I click tables. There we go. We've now got our tables. If we wanted to, we could come into here, right click, go edit top 200 rows, and we could put in customer number 1 is Fred Jones, and it was created on today. Let's just make up a date, 2001. And there we go. That saved our record in the database. We open customers again, edit top 200 rows, and there we go. We have our first record in our first database. That's it. I'm going to wrap this video up here. I want you to please replicate this, type it out yourself. I'm not going to put this code in the comments because we're going to add a lot more to it. I'm going to put the finished code in the comments because there's a lot of mistakes in here, but I just want you to kind of get used to creating tables, creating fields in the correct database on your own. And then I said we're going to come back and we're going to keep adding to it. All right, see you next video. Bye.